Oi oi, it's your boy, the DH Lawrence of Twerking on the Fence, Jack Slack, and we're coming at you on Monday the 20th of November. And I feel a little bit like a vicar between Easter and Christmas. You all crowd in after your UFC 295 saying, Jack, let's talk about all those amazing knockouts and those big names. And then next week, when it's Paul Craig versus Brendan Allen in a main event and a load of shit fighters on the undercard, my church house is quiet as a mouse. And then UFC 296 rolls around and welcome back. Yeah, come back to the church. How have you been? I'm just saying, in the words of Marilyn Monroe, if you can't handle me at my Paul Craig main event, you don't deserve me at my Alex Pereira double title knockout. But being real for a second, the real thing going on this weekend was Bellator 301, Zombie Bellator. They're already dead, but they put on a great event. And the UFC put on shite and probably still massively outperformed them, as is tradition. But I wrote a post-fight breakdown. If you're a Patreon boy, go read it. It was how Patchy Mix killed the king. Not every article is going to be called Killed the King. It's just when champions lose. And Patchy Mix was unifying the titles, beating the quote-unquote undisputed bantamweight champion Sergio Pettis. As George Carlin said, if it's undisputed, why are we fighting about it? But yeah, it was a weird situation where Pettis was in the tournament, the bantamweight tournament, which was a really good lineup, and then they pulled him because he got injured, and then they had him fight Patricio Pitbull for no reason. Patricio Pitbull went down another weight class and looked drained and bad, and Patchy Mix went through and won the tournament, and he got the interim bantamweight belt. And then they were finally wrapping it all up with this one. The lightweight tournament is still going. You know, that's just died on its arse. They had that going, and then Bellator has basically stopped. And also, Usman Nurmagomedov got caught roiding. Or maybe he didn't, because the Bellator rules and regs guy was like, look, it's not a big deal. He wasn't doping. Let's move on, without ever naming the substance that he took. But yes, if there's a nice way to wrap up Bellator, I think it's Patchy Mix emerging as a legitimate world-class fighter. Which, you know, he already had by beating Kyoji Horiguchi and Magomedov. But the Rufian Stotts and Sergio Pettis ones go a long way to helping his authority with that claim. I think from the early going of this one, you knew it was bad for Pettis because he doesn't have any power. He has no pop. And if you can't keep people off you, the moment you meet someone who's big enough to actually cut the cage on you, it will just keep walking you down and won't take bad shots and won't sprint at you and run past you like Juan Archuleta did, you're in trouble. So Mix kept walking him to the fence, and then he'd throw a big knee, because obviously Pettis is a head shorter than him, so he'd throw a big knee, and then he'd duck and get in on the hips. It was a really nice little combination. Of course, he just knocked out Rufian Stotts with a knee to the head. But there were two very cool sequences in this fight. One was the Jacare backtake, and the second was the hand fight for the finish. Both of them, if you want to see them in action with arrows saying this is how it works, go to my post-fight breakdown. But the Jacare backtake is so cool. It's when you get the seatbelt grip. So body lock is both your arms around their waist from behind. And that can come up to the chest, but basically it's under their arms. Seatbelt is one arm over their shoulders, joining your other arm under their arm. The classic jiu-jitsu back hold for jumping on and being a backpack. And he got that and one hook in. And then so he was looking to get Pettis to the mat. So he put his foot on the fence behind him and drove himself and Pettis towards the centre of the ring. And Pettis fell over and they rolled and ended up on the mat with Mix on his back. And it's so cool. Jacare Souza did it to Bristol Marunde in Strikeforce. And he really went for it because Jacare was a freak athlete. He got his foot up by Marunde's shoulder and just threw them both into the centre of the cage. And it is still a flying technique, and you are falling on your shoulder, which is like one of the most common ways to injure yourself in grappling. But it looks so cool that I forgive it. And then Diego Ferreira, who is the biggest fan of Jacare Souza, did one in the UFC, really strangely, against Anthony Pettis. So of the three notable examples of this technique being used in MMA, both the Pettis brothers are one of them. And then his hand fighting from the back was textbook. You know, it's the standard sequence. If you see Gordon Ryan when he fights someone someone who doesn't know how to deal with this, it's so smooth. It's basically, BJ Penn it sort of pioneered it, and then Marcelo Garcia did it, and then Gordon Ryan just goes through it with robotic autistic precision. But it's passing one of their when you're on their back, passing one of their hands to your foot, your leg, and pinning it to their waist or behind their back, and freeing it up so that rather than having one hand on each of his hands, you've got one hand on his left hand. His right hand is being controlled by your right foot, and then you've got your right hand free to choke. So that's what Patchy Mix was able to do. He trapped Pettis' arm. He held the other hand with his hand as long as he could while he snuck his free hand up underneath the chin, crawled his hand all the way up to the shoulder, and then he released Pettis' other hand and raced to get both hands locked for the rear naked choke. And it was tight. You could see Pettis' eyes bulging out of his head. It was really nice. It was an example of really good jiu-jitsu in MMA, done really well, because Pettis himself has a very good jiu-jitsu, very good grappling, very good wrestling, and very good stand-ups. But, they got Damian Anderson, who is a very good grappler from the B team. He won the Combat Jiu-Jitsu Worlds and things, and he's just starting in MMA. And he went down to train with Patchy Mix and said, that guy's phenomenal, not getting enough praise. And this was right at the start of the Grand Prix. I think there was sort of he size bullied Koji Horiguchi thing going on, but finishing Magomedov from the bottom is really impressive. And of course, by knocking out Rafion Stotts, he showed that he's more aware than just diving after legs. He's looking at what his opponent does. He says, oh, well, he keeps ducking his head down. I'm going to bring my knee up and knock him out. Score my first knockout of my career. Or I think it's second knockout of his career. On the subject of Rafion Stotts, he had the best fight of the weekend with Danny Sabatello. If you've not seen that one, go find it, because it might be down soon because Bellator's out of business. It was also just surprisingly good. They had a fight earlier in the year. It was a split decision for Stotts, I believe. Sabatello wasn't happy with that. Sabatello, a boring-ass wrestler cum grappler who doesn't really finish people. Stotts, much more exciting, wrestler banger. But Sabatello came out and he threw 40 head kicks in this fight. He just kept throwing punch head kick or look for the body head kick or stepping in and then coming up with a knee. He was trying to do exactly what Patchy Mix had done, catch Stotts, who's already a shorter guy in that division and likes to change level a lot, ducking down. And it made Stotts' job really hard and made it easy for Sabatello to enter on shots. The ground stuff was fantastic. I mean, these two lads just went back and forth for 15 minutes, basically trading position and constantly scrambling. And it was never just bad quality. It was always pretty slick. I thought what was very interesting was that both of them, when they were taken down into half guard, both of them would have been happy to hold top half guard. So the bottom one would turn to do what was like an old school... You can do an octopus hip bump sweep from half guard. But they'd do it they'd get the wrist, they'd start coming up onto their other hand to hip bump. And in the first round, Stotts turned him all the way over. He did basically a flip with Sabatello attached. But the second, third, fourth time he tried it, he just ended up going to his knees and giving his back. And then when Sabatello ended up on the bottom, he did exactly the same thing. They just got up to their hand and basically did a technical stand-up, taking their bottom leg out and turning their back. And then they'd wrestle up from there. Or rather, they'd scramble up and break the hands apart and turn back in. It was really interesting because neither of them wanted to play any guard or try and wrestle up from there. They literally just went, I'm going to stand up, and gave up everything in order to do so. Which makes a very interesting comparison with Paul Craig over the weekend. Craig versus Allen, I mean, as main events go, pretty much phoning it in. But it was pretty predictable. Paul Craig versus well-rounded fighter, never a good one for Paul Craig. Jimmy Crute beat him up on the ground. He's very much an oddity. And he could be much more of a force if just something about his game could change. The problem is he's got a kick and frame striking style, which can work really well. Aljamain Sterling and John Jones both do that. John Jones does not throw punches very much. Aljamain Sterling does not throw punches very much. Both of them use their kicks, and then they use their hands to frame, and they use their footwork, and then they drop in on takedowns or they tie up along the fence, and they pursue their takedowns and get them. Problem is that those guys both have very good wrestling or clinch fighting. Paul Craig has, I think it's a 20% takedown success rate in the UFC. And a lot of opponents, he doesn't even really try to take him down. He'll sit to the bottom. I feel like if you're going to be like that bottom player, well, firstly, it's got to be something you have as a backup. It cannot be your A game. And secondly, you've either got to have power in your hands so that you can panic the guy, or knock him down and get on top of him, or fluster him and make him take bad shots that you can guillotine him off, or just having power in your hands and throwing them well sets up easier takedowns. If you get the guy boxing with you and then you level change at the right time, you don't have to have like great finishing mechanics on your shots. So it's this case of either he needs to learn to hit people hard or he needs to learn to wrestle better. And the thought was by coming down in weight, he would be bigger than these guys and stronger than these guys. So at least that would make up for some of the lacking in his wrestling. And it just hasn't happened. There was a really cool calf crank he attempted from the bottom of mount, which was really interesting. Oh, he got lockdown half guard back. And it was something that Eddie Bravo used to do back in the day. He'd look for that calf crank. And I say back in the day, like before he became famous, he's talked about this. He said, well, I realized that the lockdown is basically a calf crank. What if I just reached down and grabbed the toes? And then he said, obviously that stopped working because it's very silly. But it worked here because obviously no one does it. But for the most part, this was Paul Craig getting beaten up on the bottom and then getting submitted in third. Brendan Allen gets a 5th win on the trot. Who's letting Brendan Allen get a win streak? He's so... well, I suppose that's the thing. If you're in a division of one-dimensional guys being pretty average all round, makes you the king, or nearly the king. Other fights on this bum-ass UFC card. I mean, Hooper versus Levitt was actually really good. I don't know how to talk about that because it was all highbrow techers. It was all rolling for stuff. Levitt entered the saddle. Chase Hooper turned out of the saddle, got the back off it, and then got the choke. But they went for about 10 different submissions each in this fight. It was really fun. It was exactly what it was billed as. Neither of them was like, I'm going to kickbox. So it actually turned out pretty great. Michael Morales and Jake Matthews had a fairly tepid striking match in the co-main. I heard people talking about this like it was a banger, but the majority of things that Michael Morales connected were like inside shin kick as he was trying to time Jake Matthews coming forwards. He throws his right hand and then he's got sort of like Karolina Kowalkiewicz problems where if he wants to hit the guy, he throws his right straight and then he pulls it back and throws it again. He doesn't really have like power from both sides of the plate and dexterity from both sides of the plate. You've got to be able to throw both hands alternately. You'll freak people out by throwing the same hand twice. Doubling up is still too rare in this sport, but if it's all you ever do, people just don't have to worry about your left hand. Did try some Superman punches off the cage, and the first one he got countered on, so then the next time he got back to the cage, he put his foot on the cage and did like a little stutter step jump, and then circled out, which I thought was really clever. But yeah, Michael Morales, he's looked sort of lacking in his last two. I think it's because he came into the UFC with a big knockout, and he also looks like a monster. He is on some powerful sauce of some kind. Whether that's just his genetics, is powerful. He looks good getting off the bus. And of course, Jake Matthews was at one point a lightweight, so this was a real size disparity here. Amanda Ribas wheel kicked a bitch, which was actually really funny. I quite like Ribas, her striking's getting there. Oral by laid on a dude, and then everyone was a bit weird about his appearance, and people were trying to work out if it was kind of racist, because, look into what they used to call people with Down syndrome in England. I mean, it's... Oh, Brito versus Pierce I actually really enjoyed. Jonathan Pierce, I like him. He's a pretty good all-rounder, but his grappling is really fun. And Joe Anderson Brito is Mr. Black Explosive. The first 4 minutes of a fight, he's real dangerous. But he got this in round 2, so fair play to him. Jonathan Pierce, I really liked. He was picking up singles with the head on the outside, which is an MMA sort of thing. People don't tend to do that in wrestling. If you shoot with your head on the outside, you tend to look for a high crotch and then convert it into a double. But if you saw at the start of the second round, he picked up the single with the head on the outside, did a little like fake run the pipe, and then just stepped in and did an inside trip on the rear leg, which was very Daniel Cormier. The fighter, not the ass-kissing commentator. Wait, what? They're the same person? But yeah, he was on top of Brito and he's like, why don't you do something? Why don't you do something? Stand up. And then Brito did. And Pierce was so consumed with trying to keep him down that he let his head drop. It's such a cool thing that the ninja choke's catching on, because it seemed like it was going to be a bit of a gimmick submission. But your problem, if you're good at getting up along the fence, because we've talked about this with the cage, with the wall walk before, it's so powerful that it is almost guaranteed at some point in the 5 minutes of a round you'll get up. Problems come when guys just take you down again. You know, there are guys who were not considered on the level of Khabib Nurmagomedov who got up from under Khabib Nurmagomedov and then just got taken down again. You know, even your Michael Johnsons and your Edson Barbosas, your Conor McGregors, your Dustin Poiriers, maybe not Johnson, but but Poirier and McGregor both got up from sitting along the fence and then got taken down again. The wonderful thing about that ninja choke is that if the guy is over-committing to trying to get you down again, it's right there to snatch up. Especially, like, people don't often differentiate, but I've heard it, a power guillotine is like when you've got their head in the hole on the bicep side, and then you lock your hands over the top. A ninja choke is much more in front of your body, like you're turning sideways to them. And that's the kind that Brito got here. I was going to say that's the rough thing about the bantamweight class. You can have a great streak of wins and then you have to fight some other killer and you lose it and you never go near a title shot. But this is featherweight. So either of these guys, well, actually, no, featherweight's more like a gerontocracy. It's just guys like Brian Ortega are in the top 5 for no reason. It's bantamweight that's just the shark tank. Anything else good on that card? Christian Leroy Duncan was all right against Dennis Tiulin, but Dennis Tiulin is so mediocre. I've just not been impressed by him ever. Even when he beat up Jamie Pickett, I was more like, damn, Jamie Pickett, how bad are you? But the elbows on the break were really nice. And then he got the finish by just grabbing the head and hitting 5 uppercuts with a collar tie. Tiulin is tough, but he's just not very good. The one that everyone's talking about, because, I mean, this is how slow the week was. They're talking about Eileen Perez versus Lucy Pudilova. Basically just mounted her for 2 rounds and then struggled in the third. But mainly people are talking about this because Eileen Perez had a crazy fight week where Jocelyn Edwards apparently gave her a black eye in the Performance Institute. And then Perez's coach jumped on Edwards and started beating the shit out of her and choking her out. And other people came to her aid. And as in Perez's male coach beat the shit out of Jocelyn Edwards. This has been confirmed by Alex Davies, the chode manager, who is any pro-UFC anti-fighter pay position you can take, this guy will take it and confidently defend it. But my reason for doubting this story is purely because I've seen Jocelyn Edwards fight and I don't think she gives anyone a black eye. But no, if it's true, that's fucking crazy. Get that coach as far away from the UFC as possible, because you've already got enough trouble with domestic abuse with just the fighters. But the main thing that everyone was focused on was Eileen Perez's twerking on the cage. I think I see so many people tweeting like, I can't believe people are outraged by this, you losers. But I don't think I've seen anyone actually be outraged by it. You know, it's twerking, no one cares. The people who do care are like the people who were mad about the song Wet Ass Pussy, and they don't really watch cage fights. I say that, Tucker Carlson was in the fucking front row of one the other week. But that's more performatively getting mad for your audience. I mean the people who are actually mad about people twerking. No, my opinion on this is I like people who have big juicy asses and don't make it their whole personality. Like my girl Norma Dumont. She makes her pretty mid 1-2 based boxing her personality and happens to have the best ass in the division. In fact, I'd go so far as to say the girl's got an ass like I've never seen. But it was extremely funny, this last winning after riding the Sibian from Mount. Classic Howard Stern bit. She said, it's my son's birthday, and they cut to the son and then they cut back to the mum twerking, and the son's face is just like, oh, fuck. Anything else good happened the weekend? Oh, Jason Jackson, the ass-kicking machine, actually did some ass-kicking. He normally wins decisions, got his first knockout in 5 years, beating the shit out of Yaroslav Amosov, who was so highly touted. He was in people's pound-for-pound all organisations lists. There were people saying that he could be the best welterweight in the world. He'd come over and beat Leon Edwards. It's like, nope, just watched him when he can't get a takedown. which, takedown defense, one of Leon Edwards' strong points. When he can't get a takedown, what did that Yaroslav Amosov do? He was getting countered by the guy throwing his hips back, throwing an uppercut, and digging underhooks. Also, just slipping the jab and throwing the uppercut afterwards, because the corner picks up on the fact that Amosov will just jab and then try and duck onto the hips. And rather than trying to deal with that, Amosov just tried to tie up more. He just kept jabbing and ducking into the clinch, and never really doing anything else. He threw one high kick in the first round that almost took Jackson's head off while he was loading up the uppercut. But man, he should have been throwing left hooks constantly. He should have just been throwing slappy left hooks as a lead. He should have been throwing right hands into left hooks. Because if the guy is loading up uppercuts, his hand is dropping below his chest on his right side. He is a sucker for the left hook, and Amosov didn't work it out, and neither did his corner. But fair play to Jackson, he looked phenomenal. And he's worked so hard in basically obscurity to come in and steal this guy's spotlight. And of course, because it's like when Mousasi lost, it's not that oh my God, how good must that guy have been to beat him? It's more like, oh, let's move on now. until another slightly exotic guy wins a few fights in a row outside the UFC. Sorry, Jason Jackson, you don't have that Mousasi appeal. But no, I'd love to see Jason Jackson in the UFC. I'd love to see any of these guys in the UFC. That's why it was devastating that someone announced that Patchy Mix has just extended his Bellator contract with a company that's going out of business. This was their last event, supposedly. PFL is supposed to be announcing that they've bought them soon. Someone was saying they're going to do a presser on Thanksgiving, which just makes me laugh so much because for years I've been saying these people, the PFL, they are just World Series of Fighting. They just rebranded it. They rebadged it, you fool. And they used to do things like, we're going to do a show on New Year's Eve at Madison Square Garden. And when I heard that, I went, that's stupid. Because everyone who has a wife and would love to watch fights, or friends and would love to watch fights, is going to have someone asking them to be somewhere else on that evening. Pick any other night of the year. But to do a press conference on Thanksgiving would just be perfect for them. They're about to do a pay-per-view. I've not been able to watch their whole season, even though they've had great fights like Clay Collard versus OSP. And I've not been able to watch it because they lost their TV deal with Channel 4 in the UK, didn't bother negotiating a different one. And now they're doing their finals as a pay-per-view, but because it's 4 titles are on the line, they haven't put any of those on the poster. They've got 4 titles on the line, then a picture of Kayla Harrison and Aspen Ladd, and then says plus Harrison versus Ladd. It's who is paying $50 for a Kayla Harrison fight, let alone an Aspen Ladd fight? And then the other news about fight companies just arsing around was that apparently one is in dire financial straits. John Nash just quoted a piece from an article that said one's runway is expected to expire by Q3 of next year. If you've been listening to this podcast for any time, or if you have eyes, you will have known that One Championship was doing something unsustainable. Everything they talk about is view counts and YouTube streams and things. It's how are you making money? Where's your money coming in? It's a fight company sold as a tech company, and it's just, they don't seem to be, they're never going to be profitable because they're so far in the hole now. I think we're $250 million in the hole at this point. And the answer has always been, I'll go and raise more funds by talking to venture capitalists' most useless sons. And then the other weird thing that happened that I forgot to talk about was Trey Ogden, who apparently has taken over James Krause's gym because James Krause has been exiled and may end up spending the rest of his life in prison. Yeah, he beat the brakes off Nicholas Motta. And I remember I started watching this fight and I went, I know Trey Ogden because I've made the Ogden's crunchy nut joke a couple of times on the podcast. Can't remember what he does for the life of me. But this one will make me remember him, not just for the awful stoppage or the awful post-fight stuff. But he looked great. Jabbed him up, wrestled him well, got him down in the third round, gets a arm triangle that's pretty, probably dead to rights. I've seen a lot of people say he was definitely going out and he was looking for an excuse from the ref. When have you seen that work? When have you seen blaming the ref work like this? It was probably he was just squirming because sometimes if the guy gets too high up, and it's often you can't see it, it's not visible to the outsider. But if you get too high up over the shoulder, you can not have the pressure on in the same way. If the guy's squirming into you, turning towards you as Motta was trying to do, that makes it hard to apply the pressure. But the referee stepped in and stopped it. It was Mike Beltran. Ogden thinks he's got the submission win. Motta immediately complains, like you're supposed to save face. And They don't even tell them in the cage. They do it over the announcement that it's a no contest. And Trey Ogden rightly said, I've got bills to pay. I don't care about the win. I need my win money. It's like, yeah, well, if you're going to pay people half and half because you don't think they're going to try, you have to kind of consider what's going to happen if they get robbed of a fair win. Because it's not down to Ogden that this is a no contest. It's not even down to Motta. It's down to the ref. But I guarantee that they're not going to give him his win money. And I can almost guarantee that Alex Davis, the manager, will come out and tell you why that's a good thing. And keeps Trey Ogden hungry. But that was your lot for this week. Short podcast because it was pretty shite. There was a Rise card on that had a good tournament on, which I'm going to go and watch because I want to talk about that on Wednesday. Particularly, Jin Mandakoro really impressed me in the clips that I've seen of him. And the women's title fight actually looked pretty good, even though I was down on it because I'm so used to women's MMA. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday and some other stuff. If you want to read my post-fight article, see all the weird grappling nerd shit I was talking about, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, get the Boycast. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Paul Craig's next 2 wins over bad middleweights. Bless.